shooter. Marcus's hand hovered over the biometric override lock, his face pale, a bead of cold sweat tracing his jawline. Before it tears her apart, Alpha, I have a clear shot. Stand down, Cassian ordered. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble that rattled the glass of the security room and left no room for debate. His dark, unrelenting eyes remained locked on the glowing monitors, his mind violently rejecting the live feed from the subterranean vault. Down in the titanium-reinforced enclosure, the nightmare creature known as the King's Beast, a 300-pound apex predator of shadow and teeth that had ripped rival alphas to shreds, was currently lying flat on its back. A petite woman in a faded thrift store sweater was kneeling in the dirt, aggressively scratching the monster's exposed, lethal belly. "Who is she?" Cassian whispered. A strange, suffocating tightness gripping his chest as the impossible unfolded on the screen. He'd never seen the beast wag its tail. Cassian did not run. An Alpha King never ran. But his strides through the subterranean corridors of the obsidian glass estate were long, silent, and predatory enough that his heavily armed guards scrambled to press their backs against the concrete walls as he passed. The air down here was usually freezing, pumped with clinical suppressants designed to keep the rage of the creature manageable. Today, it felt thick, charged with an electric static that made the hairs on Cassian's arms stand on end. How did she bypass the secondary airlock? Cassian demanded, his voice dangerously quiet. Marcus struggled to keep pace, his heavy combat boots echoing against the floor. "She didn't force it, sir. The system registered the inner doors opening from the inside. The beast hit the release pad." Cassian stopped dead. The silence in the corridor was absolute, save for the distant hum of the HVAC system. He turned his head slowly, his jaw clenching so hard a muscle feathered beneath his scarred cheek. "You're telling me a feral dire, a creature that has spent the last 5 years trying to chew through titanium plating to slaughter us all, politely opened the door for a human?" Marcus swallowed hard, looking at his tablet. "Yes, Alpha." Cassian resumed his punishing pace. It defied logic. The beast wasn't just a wolf. It was an ancient, recessive mutation in the Lycan bloodline. It was a physical manifestation of the pack's darkest instincts, surrendered to Cassian upon his ascension to the throne. It possessed no humanity, no empathy. It was pure, unadulterated violence, wrapped in matted black fur and razor-sharp bone. It was fed via mechanical chutes because the last handler who tried to slide a bowl across the floor lost his arm at the shoulder. And yet, the security feed had shown a woman with a messy bun and a mustard-yellow sweater rubbing its belly. "Who is she?" Cassian asked again, rounding the final corner toward the heavy blast doors of Sector 4. "Lisa Thorne," Marcus read quickly. 26. She's the collateral brought in this morning. Her father is Arthur Thorne. He owes the syndicate $3 million in gambling debts. He handed her over to buy a week's extension." Cassian let out a low, predatory exhale. He remembered the brief report on his desk. He hadn't even looked at the girl. He abhorred human trafficking, and his instructions had been to put her in a comfortable guest suite, figure out a legal way to seize her father's assets, and send her back to her life with a wiped memory. "She was supposed to be in the East Wing," Cassian said, his voice dropping an octave, slipping closer to the lethal resonance of his inner wolf. "Sector 4 is restricted." She wandered, Alpha. The guards, they thought she was staff. "Remind me to execute them later," Cassian said mildly, stepping up to the massive steel doors of the enclosure. He placed his palm on the biometric scanner. The machine whirred, analyzing his heartbeat, his heat signature, and the distinct, dominating pheromones of the Alpha King. A heavy hydraulic hiss echoed through the cavernous space as the locks disengaged. Cassian pushed the doors open, stepping into the dim, artificial twilight of the enclosure. The air inside smelled of damp earth, crushed pine, and the sharp, metallic tang of old blood. He braced himself for the familiar, deafening roar, the sight of the massive shadow launching itself at the reinforced glass barrier. Instead, he heard a soft, melodic humming. Cassian stepped out of the shadows and into the simulated clearing. He froze. The sight before him short-circuited every instinct honed over 3 decades of brutal survival. The beast, a creature whose shoulder height rivaled Cassian's own chest, was resting its massive, terrifying head on Lisa's lap. Its eyes, usually glowing pits of amber madness, were half closed in a state of absolute bliss. Lisa was humming a low, tuneless melody, her small, pale hands methodically massaging the thick, muscular ridges behind the monster's ears. She wasn't shaking. Her scent, a delicate mixture of cheap vanilla body wash and old paper, was entirely devoid of the sour, metallic stench of fear. Cassian stood paralyzed, a predator out of his depth. He watched as the beast shifted its colossal weight, letting out a sound that Cassian had never, in his entire life, heard it make. It was a soft, rumbling purr. Cassian's shadow fell over the artificial grass, long and imposing. The beast's ears twitched. Its amber eyes snapped open, locking onto Cassian. The low, contented rumble in its chest instantly transformed into a deep, vibrating growl that vibrated through the soles of Cassian's bespoke leather shoes. The creature bared teeth the size of hunting knives, its lip curling into a snarl of pure territorial aggression. Lisa stopped humming. She looked down at the massive head in her lap, then followed the beast's gaze up to where Cassian stood. For a second, the world seemed to hold its breath. Cassian waited for the realization to hit her. He waited for the scream, the sudden panic that would undoubtedly trigger the beast's prey drive and end in a spray of crimson. Instead, Lisa frowned. She didn't look terrified. She looked profoundly annoyed. "It's not polite to sneak up on a deeply traumatized animal," Lisa said, her voice clear and reprimanding. She placed a calming, steady hand over the beast's snout, gently forcing its head back down. "Shh, it's okay, buddy. I'm right here." To Cassian's utter disbelief, the monster yielded to the pressure of her small hand. It huffed a breath of hot air that ruffled her sweater, casting one last murderous glare at Cassian before resting its chin back on her thighs. "Traumatized," Cassian echoed, the word feeling foreign in his mouth. He stepped forward, his dominant aura flaring instinctively. "Do you have any idea what that thing is?" Lisa looked up at him, her hazel eyes narrowing as she took in his tailored charcoal suit, his broad shoulders, and the cold, unyielding lines of his face. She didn't cower under his alpha presence, which was in itself a physical impossibility for a human. "I know what he looks like," Lisa said, her tone clipped. "He looks like a severe case of neglect. His coat is matted, his paw pads are cracked from pacing on concrete, and he's displaying classic signs of isolation-induced hyperaggression." She glared at Cassian. "Are you the owner?" Behind Cassian, Marcus let out a choked, terrified sound. No one spoke to the Alpha King that way. Men had been gutted for breathing too loudly in his presence. Cassian slowly tilted his head. "I am." Lisa scoffed, a bitter, dismissive sound. "Then you should be ashamed of yourself. You buy an exotic breed. What is he, some kind of illegal wolf-dog hybrid, a Caucasian shepherd mix, and you lock him in a dark basement? No wonder he's volatile. He's starved for socialization." Cassian stared at her. An illegal wolf-dog hybrid. He looked at the beast. The creature that had once bitten a rogue vampire in half was currently thumping its tail against the dirt. Thump, thump, thump. Because Lisa was scratching its chin again. "He is not a pet," Cassian said softly, his voice carrying a lethal edge that usually dropped grown men to their knees. "He is an executioner. If you stop touching him, he will likely tear your throat out." Lisa's hands paused. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her features. She looked down at the massive jaws resting inches from her stomach. The beast let out a soft whine, nudging her hand with a nose the size of a bowling ball, demanding the scratches resume. Lisa swallowed, then looked back at Cassian, her chin lifting in an undeniable show of defiance. "He's a living creature, and right now, the only monster in this room is the one wearing the $3,000 suit." Cassian felt a sharp, unexpected jolt in his chest. It wasn't anger. It was a vicious, thrilling spark of absolute fascination. His inner wolf, usually a dark, slumbering force of control, paced forward in his mind, pressing against the forefront of his consciousness. "Mate," the instinct whispered, entirely unbidden. Cassian ruthlessly shoved the instinct down. He was a king. He did not succumb to fairy tale biological imperatives, especially not with human collateral. "Get up," Cassian commanded, letting a fraction of his true power bleed into the room. The air grew heavy, pressing down on the lungs of everyone present. Lisa flinched, her breath hitching as the sudden pressure hit her. She carefully slid her legs out from under the beast. The monster instantly rose with her, standing to its full, terrifying height. It positioned itself directly between Lisa and Cassian, the fur on its spine bristling into a jagged ridge of black needles. "He's protecting me," Lisa breathed, genuine wonder in her voice. "He is claiming you," Cassian corrected darkly. And that was a problem. A catastrophic problem. The tension in the enclosure was a physical thing, thick and suffocating like smoke. The beast stood rigid, a living wall of muscle and shadow, its growl a constant low-frequency hum that vibrated in Cassian's teeth. Every instinct Cassian possessed screamed at him to submit the creature, to force it to the ground and remind it who the alpha was. But if he initiated a dominance challenge now, the beast would fight to the death to protect its new claim, and Lisa would be caught in the crossfire. "Step away from it, Lisa," Cassian said, his tone shifting from a command to a low, dangerous warning. Lisa stood frozen behind the massive animal. Her hands were trembling slightly now, the adrenaline wearing off, reality bleeding through her stubbornness. "You know my name." "I know everything about you," Cassian replied smoothly, holding his ground. He kept his hands relaxed at his sides, projecting absolute stillness. "I know your father, Arthur, offered you to my syndicate to cover a $3 million debt. I know you were brought here as collateral." Lisa's face drained of color. The defiance in her eyes shattered, replaced by a stark, hollow betrayal. He said it was a job interview, a live-in behaviorist position for a private client." Cassian felt a rare, unwelcome twinge of pity. "He lied. He sold you to save his own life." Lisa looked down at her hands, her shoulders slumping. A heavy, agonizing silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the beast's ragged breathing. Cassian watched the heartbreak ripple through her, fascinated by the way her scent shifted from vanilla to the bitter tang of sorrow. The beast whined, turning its massive head to nudge Lisa's hip in a clumsy attempt at comfort. "So, what happens now?" Lisa asked, her voice raspy but surprisingly steady. She looked up at him, her hazel eyes hardening with a desperate kind of resolve. "Do you lock me in a cell? Sell me to someone else?" "My syndicate does not deal in human flesh," Cassian said coldly, disgusted by the implication. "My intent was to seize your father's offshore accounts, void the debt, and send you home by dinner." Lisa let out a harsh, humorless laugh. "Arthur Thorne doesn't have offshore accounts. He has a rusted sedan and a stack of maxed-out credit cards. If you're looking for $3 million, you're not going to find it." Cassian's jaw tightened. He knew that. His forensic accountants had already confirmed Thorne was entirely bankrupt. "Then the debt remains unpaid," Cassian stated, taking a slow, calculated step forward. The beast snapped its jaws, a warning clack of bone that echoed like a gunshot, but Cassian ignored it, his eyes locked on Lisa. "Which means you belong to me." Lisa's chin shot up. "I don't belong to anyone." "You do now." Cassian gestured toward the hulking shadow standing between them. "Because of him." Lisa blinked, confused. "What?" "No one can enter this vault without risking dismemberment," Cassian explained, his voice low, weaving a trap of logic around her. "He requires sedation just to have his enclosure cleaned. Yet you walked in, and he submitted. You hold the leash to a weapon I cannot control. That makes you incredibly valuable to me, Lisa." She stared at him, realizing the gravity of her situation. She was trapped, not by iron bars, but by her own inexplicable connection to the monster. You want me to be his handler. I want you to tame him, Cassian corrected. You owe my syndicate $3 million. You will live on this estate. You will be provided for. Your only duty is to ensure that Beast remains as docile as he is right now. You do that, and you chip away at your father's debt. And if I refuse, she challenged, though her voice wavered. Cassian's eyes darkened, the gold of his inner wolf bleeding into his irises for a fraction of a second. If you refuse, I have no reason to keep you here. You will be sent back out those doors, and the beast will revert to his violent nature. He will likely tear down the walls trying to find you. Cassian paused, letting the weight of his words settle. And I will hold your father accountable for his debts in the traditional manner. Lisa swallowed hard. She knew what traditional manner meant in the underworld. A death sentence. She looked at the beast. It looked back at her, its terrifying amber eyes soft and expectant. It nudged her hand again. She couldn't abandon it to the cold, clinical darkness of this vault, and she couldn't let her father die, despite his betrayal. Fine, Lisa whispered, her fingers burying into the thick fur of the monster's neck. I'll stay. I'll be his handler. Cassian felt a surge of triumph, shadowed by a dangerous, possessive thrill. Excellent. He turned on his heel to leave, the heavy blast doors hissing open at his approach. But before he stepped out into the corridor, he paused, looking back over his shoulder. Lisa was already kneeling in the dirt again, whispering softly to the massive predator. Cassian's chest tightened once more. He had secured his greatest weapon, but as he watched her, he couldn't shake the unsettling realization that by keeping her here, he had just invited something far more dangerous into his life. The suite they placed her in was larger than her father's entire house. It possessed the kind of quiet, intimidating luxury that only came from generational wealth. Vaulted ceilings, charcoal silk wallpaper, and a massive four-poster bed draped in Egyptian cotton. Lisa didn't so much as sit on it. Instead, she stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the sprawling, forested grounds of the estate. Rain lashed against the reinforced glass, blurring the perimeter walls and the armed patrols marching the grounds. She was a prisoner, a very comfortable, very expensive prisoner. A soft knock broke the silence, followed by the heavy oak door swinging open. Cassian stepped inside. He had discarded the jacket of his suit, leaving him in a tailored black dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. The casual state of undress only made him look more dangerous, highlighting the thick, corded muscles of his forearms and the faint, silvery edge of a scar disappearing beneath his collar. "The chef has prepared dinner," Cassian said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to physically vibrate against the walls of the room. "You haven't eaten since you arrived." "I'm not hungry," Lisa replied, not turning away from the window. "But we need to talk about his diet." Cassian paused, his brow furrowing. "Whose diet?" "The dog's," Lisa said, finally turning to face him. She crossed her arms defensively, ignoring the way his dark eyes swept over her with an intense, calculating weight. "I checked the feeding logs the guards left on the tablet. You've been dropping raw, frozen cattle carcasses down a chute twice a week. It's terrible for his digestion, and the lack of foraging stimulation is contributing to his neurotic behavior." Cassian stared at her. For a long, suspended moment, he genuinely did not know how to respond. He was the Alpha King of the Eastern Seaboard. He controlled politicians, ports, and a pack of 3,000 lethal predators. And this woman, currently wearing a sweater that was unraveling at the hem, was scolding him about the beast's digestive health. "Lisa," Cassian began, his tone carrying a warning edge, "I feel you are still failing to grasp the reality of the situation. That creature is not a pet. It is a biological weapon." "He's an animal," Lisa shot back, her hazel eyes flashing with a fierce, uncompromising light. "And right now, he is my responsibility. You said it yourself. My job is to keep him docile. I can't do that if he's suffering from compound stress and malnutrition." She uncrossed her arms and took a step toward him, completely oblivious to the fact that her proximity was making Cassian's inner wolf pace frantically against its cage. I need fresh meat. Venison, rabbit, organ meats. I need cognitive puzzle feeders. And I need the titanium plating in his enclosure covered. The echo down there is deafening. Cassian's jaw tightened. You are making demands. I am negotiating the terms of my employment. Lisa corrected coldly. I owe you $3 million. At a standard handler's rate, I'll be here until I'm dead. The least you can do is let me do the job properly. The silence that followed was heavy, fraught with a thick electric tension. Cassian looked down at her. She was so small, so devastatingly fragile compared to his world, yet she possessed a spine of absolute steel. Her scent, that delicate maddening blend of vanilla and old paper, was free of fear. She was angry. She was defiant, and she was entirely magnificent. Fine, Cassian said softly, the single word feeling like a massive concession. He stepped closer, crowding her space just enough to remind her of the physical disparity between them. Give Marcus a list. He will source whatever you need. Lisa blinked, clearly surprised that he had yielded so easily. Good. And I need a leash. Cassian went entirely still. The air in the room seemed to freeze. A leash. He needs to walk, Mr. Cassian. He's been locked in a basement for 5 years. The muscle atrophy in his hindquarters is starting to show. Tomorrow morning I'm taking him outside. Absolutely not, Cassian commanded, his voice dropping into the lethal, gravelly register of the Alpha. The beast does not leave Sector 4. If he gets loose on the grounds, he will slaughter my men. He won't get loose, Lisa said, lifting her chin, because I'll be holding the leash. Cassian looked into her eyes, searching for any sign of hesitation, any crack in her absolute certainty. He found none. He realized then, with a cold sense of dread, that she didn't just pity the monster in the basement. She identified with it. They were both trapped, both betrayed by the men who were supposed to protect them, and both fighting for survival in a world of predators. Tomorrow at dawn, Cassian finally ground out, his eyes darkening to a dangerous, shadowed gold. And I will be with you. If he so much as bares his teeth at a guard, I will put a bullet in his skull myself. Are we clear? Lisa swallowed hard, but nodded. Crystal. The morning air was sharp and biting. The estate grounds shrouded in a thick, rolling mist that clung to the ancient pine trees. Cassian stood on the stone terrace, a heavy tactical coat draped over his shoulders, watching as the reinforced blast doors of Sector 4 groaned open at the far end of the courtyard. Every guard in the vicinity had their assault rifles raised, the safety catches clicking off in a terrifying, synchronized wave. From the shadows of the vault, Lisa emerged. She looked small in the vast gray morning, her hair pulled back into a tight ponytail. In her right hand, she held a thick, reinforced chain attached to a leather harness that Marcus had spent the entire night having custom-stitched by the Syndicate's armorer. Beside her walked the beast. Out in the open, the creature was somehow even more terrifying. The dawn light caught the jagged, matted ridges of its black fur, emphasizing the sheer, monstrous bulk of its shoulders. It didn't walk so much as prowl, its massive head sweeping back and forth, amber eyes burning through the mist. A low, guttural growl vibrated from the creature's chest as it registered the armed guards. The sound was so deep it rattled the loose stones in the courtyard. "Hey," Lisa said sharply, giving the chain a firm, short tug. "Leave it." The beast snapped its jaws, a sound like two steel beams colliding. It looked down at Lisa, its ears flattening. Cassian tensed, his hand dropping to the heavy, silver-loaded magnum at his hip. But Lisa simply reached out and tapped the monster on the nose. I said, "Leave it. Focus." The beast blinked. It let out a huff of hot air, the terrifying ridge of fur on its spine slowly flattening. It pressed its massive shoulder against her hip, an undeniable physical claim, and matched its gait to her short, human strides. A collective, shuddering breath of disbelief swept through the guards. "Keep your weapons lowered," Cassian ordered through the comms in his ear, his voice tight. Do not engage unless it breaks the chain. Lisa led the beast toward the edge of the tree line. She was speaking to it constantly, a low, murmuring stream of nonsense words and praise. Cassian watched from the terrace, his chest tight with an emotion he refused to name. He watched as the creature that had haunted his nightmares, the physical manifestation of his bloodline's darkest curse, stopped to thoroughly sniff a patch of damp ferns. Then, the unthinkable happened. Silas, one of Cassian's lieutenants, had been patrolling the perimeter. He rounded a large oak tree and suddenly found himself face to face with the beast. Panic, raw and blinding, overtook the lieutenant's training. Silas shouted, bringing his rifle up and aiming directly at the monster's chest. The beast reacted with blinding speed. The docile companion vanished, replaced instantly by the apex predator. With a roar that tore through the mist, the beast lunged, completely ignoring the heavy chain in Lisa's hand. Lisa was yanked forward, her boots skidding across the wet grass. But instead of letting go, she threw her entire body weight backward, planting her feet. "No!" she screamed. The beast hit the end of the chain with bone-jarring force. The heavy leather harness dug into its chest, halting its momentum inches from Silas's terrified face. The creature's jaws snapped on empty air, flecks of saliva hitting the lieutenant's tactical vest. "Shoot it!" Silas screamed, stumbling backward, his finger tightening on the trigger. Before Silas could fire, a shadow descended upon him. Cassian hit the lieutenant with the force of a freight train. He didn't use a weapon. He grabbed Silas by the tactical vest and hurled him backward. The man flew 10 feet through the air, crashing violently into the trunk of a pine tree. "I gave an order to hold fire," Cassian roared, his voice layered with the terrifying resonant echo of the Alpha King. His eyes flashed brilliant, unmistakable gold. The sheer pressure of his dominance forced every guard in the courtyard to drop to one knee. Lisa stood frozen, breathing heavily, the heavy chain wrapped twice around her bleeding hands. The beast was still snarling, but it had retreated, positioning itself firmly between Lisa and the rest of the men. Cassian turned his blazing eyes toward her. He saw the red raw skin on her palms where the chain had dug in. He saw the tremble in her knees, but she hadn't let go. She had held the line. "Are you injured?" Cassian asked, his chest heaving, the wolf inside him thrashing wildly at the scent of her blood. "I'm fine," Lisa gasped out. She looked from Cassian to the groaning lieutenant on the ground, and back to Cassian. Her brow furrowed, a profound confusion mixing with the adrenaline in her eyes. Why did they all kneel when you yelled?" Cassian realized his mistake. In his panic to protect her, he had let the veil slip. "Because they know who pays them," Cassian lied smoothly, his golden eyes slowly fading back to dark brown. He stepped toward her, reaching out to gently take the heavy chain from her bleeding hands. "The walk is over, Lisa. Take him back to the vault." Midnight settled heavily over the estate. The rain had returned, a steady, rhythmic drumming against the glass. Lisa sat on the floor of the massive, cavernous library, a first aid kit open beside her. The grand fireplace was roaring, casting long dancing shadows across the rows of leather-bound books. She was meticulously wrapping her raw palms in white gauze, wincing as the antiseptic stung. She couldn't sleep. The events of the morning played on a loop in her mind. The speed of the beast. The terrifying, inhuman roar of Cassian's voice. The way heavily armed, hardened criminals had dropped to their knees like obedient dogs simply because Cassian had raised his voice. Nothing about this place made sense. It wasn't just a crime syndicate. It felt older, deeper. "You should let a medic look at those." Lisa flinched, looking up. Cassian was leaning against the heavy mahogany door frame. He moved with a supernatural stillness that constantly unsettled her. He was wearing dark sweatpants and a simple black t-shirt, looking far less like a king and much more like a man. "I can manage," Lisa said, biting off the end of the medical tape and securing the bandage. "I'm used to taking care of myself." Cassian walked into the room, the firelight catching the sharp angles of his face. He sat down in a heavy leather armchair a few feet from her, steepling his fingers. Your father did not provide a stable environment. It wasn't a question. Lisa looked back down at her hands. Arthur provided a roof. The stability was up to me. When you grow up with a man who gambles away the grocery money, you learn to wrap your own wounds. She let out a small, self-deprecating laugh. I guess I shouldn't be surprised he bet me on a bad hand. Cassian felt a dangerous surge of protective rage. He wanted to find Arthur Thorne, drag him back from wherever he was hiding, and let the beast have him. He will never hurt you again. You have my word on that. Lisa looked up, meeting his gaze. The intensity in his dark eyes made her breath catch. There was a strange, magnetic pull between them, an invisible gravity that she couldn't explain. She felt it whenever he was near, a warmth that started in her chest and radiated outward. Why is he locked up? Lisa asked softly, changing the subject, needing to break the tension. The dog. What did he do that made you hate him so much? Cassian looked away, staring into the flames. The truth was a labyrinth of bloodlines and curses, of Lycan history she wouldn't comprehend. He is a part of my family's legacy, Cassian said slowly, choosing his words with agonizing care. A dark part. Years ago he lost control. He killed people, good people. He is locked away to protect the world from him. Or to protect him from the world, Lisa murmured. Cassian's gaze snapped back to her. What? When Silas pointed that gun at him today, Lisa said, pulling her knees to her chest. The beast didn't attack because he's a mindless killer. He attacked because he thought Silas was going to hurt me. He was being protective. She looked at Cassian, her hazel eyes searching his face. If he's been treated like a monster his whole life, it's no wonder he acts like one. Maybe he just needed someone to show him he doesn't have to be. Cassian sat completely still. Her words struck him with the force of a physical blow. She wasn't just talking about the beast in the basement. She was, entirely by accident, talking about the beast sitting in the chair in front of her, the Alpha King, the executioner. She is the key, his wolf whispered, the voice no longer a feral demand, but a reverent hum. She sees us. Cassian leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He was close enough now that he could catch the subtle, underlying notes of her scent. Beneath the vanilla and paper, there was the faintest trace of something uniquely hers, a sweetness that made his fangs ache to descend. You are a very dangerous woman, Lisa, Cassian said, his voice dropping to a raw, intimate whisper. Lisa's heart hammered against her ribs. She didn't pull away. I'm not dangerous. I'm just a girl trying to pay off a debt. No, Cassian breathed, his eyes drifting down to her lips for a fraction of a second before snapping back to her eyes. You walked into a vault of shadows and commanded the darkness to heal. You survived the wrath of my men without flinching. He slowly reached out, his large, warm hand covering her bandaged fingers. The contact sent a shockwave of electricity straight up Lisa's arm. The debt is irrelevant now. You have altered the entire ecosystem of my house. Lisa swallowed, her mouth suddenly dry. Cassian? She used his first name. It was the first time she had done so. It sounded like a prayer on her lips. Cassian's control, usually an impenetrable fortress, developed a massive, irreparable crack. Before he could do something they would both regret, before he dragged her into his lap and marked the delicate skin of her throat to claim her in front of the gods and his pack, a sharp, frantic buzzing interrupted them. Cassian's comms unit, sitting on the table beside him, was flashing red. He ripped his gaze away from her, snatching the device. Report, he barked, his voice instantly returning to the cold, harsh bark of the Alpha. Alpha! Marcus's voice crackled through the speaker, tight with panic. It's Sector 4. The biometric locks have been overridden from the outside. The blast doors are open. Cassian's blood ran cold. And Alpha? Marcus swallowed loudly. The beast is gone. The blare of the estate's emergency sirens shattered the intimate quiet of the library, a jagged, deafening wail that vibrated in Lisa's teeth. The heavy, romantic tension that had hung between them just seconds ago evaporated. replaced instantly by the suffocating chill of a nightmare, realized. Cassian was already moving. He didn't run, but his strides were predatory, a blur of terrifying efficiency as he crossed the room and keyed a code into a hidden wall panel. A weapons cache slid open, gleaming with matte black steel. "Stay here," Cassian commanded, his voice devoid of the warmth it had held moments ago. He strapped a heavy tactical holster over his broad shoulders, his dark eyes entirely devoid of human empathy. The Alpha King had returned. "Lock the heavy oak doors. Do not open them for anyone but me or Marcus." Lisa scrambled to her feet, ignoring the throbbing pain in her freshly bandaged palms. "I'm going with you." Cassian paused, turning to look at her as he checked the chamber of a heavy-caliber handgun. The firelight caught the terrifying, unyielding lines of his jaw. "No, you are not. The beast is loose on a secure compound in the middle of a storm. He is disoriented, terrified, and highly aggressive. If my men corner him, it will be a bloodbath." "Which is exactly why I need to be there," Lisa argued, crossing the room to stand directly in front of him. She tilted her chin up, refusing to back down beneath his imposing glare. "He knows my scent, Cassian. He trusts me. If your men start firing assault rifles at him, he's going to tear them to pieces. I can call him off. I'm his handler." "You are a human girl who managed to scratch his chin without losing an arm," Cassian snapped, the raw fear for her safety bleeding into his anger. He stepped closer, his massive frame dwarfing hers. "Out there in the dark, he will not see you as a handler. He will see prey. You stay." Before she could argue further, Cassian's earpiece crackled violently. He pressed a finger to his ear, his expression darkening into a mask of pure, murderous intent. "Repeat that, Marcus. Say exactly how it happened." Lisa watched as Cassian's chest expanded with a slow, terrifying intake of air. The air in the library grew physically heavy, pressing down on Lisa's lungs. She could almost feel the phantom weight of a wolf's presence pacing in the room. "Understood," Cassian finally said, his voice a low, lethal whisper. "Mobilize the inner perimeter. Lethal force is authorized only if he breaches the outer wall. I am tracking him myself." He dropped his hand, looking down at Lisa. The golden hue of his inner wolf was bleeding into the edges of his dark irises, a clear sign that his control was fracturing under the weight of an immense betrayal. "What happened?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling slightly. "The biometric locks were not hacked," Cassian said, his tone dead and hollow. "They were overridden using a command-level security card. Someone opened the blast doors and disabled the shock collars." Lisa's eyes widened as the realization hit her. Silas, the lieutenant from the courtyard, the man who had been humiliated in front of his squad, thrown like a rag doll by his own alpha for drawing a weapon on a monster. He hadn't just been angry. He had been looking for vengeance. By releasing the beast, Silas was forcing Cassian's hand, ensuring the creature would have to be put down by the estate's heavy artillery. "He wants the beast dead," Lisa breathed, terror gripping her heart. "Cassian, you have to let me come. If Silas finds him first—" "If Silas finds him first," Cassian interrupted, his voice dropping an octave, slipping into a resonant, monstrous growl that rattled the antique glass of the library windows. "Silas is a dead man." Cassian turned on his heel and strode out the door, moving with a supernatural speed that Lisa could barely track. She stood alone in the cavernous room for exactly 3 seconds. She looked at the heavy oak doors, then down at her bandaged hands. If she stayed, the only living creature that had ever shown her genuine, unadulterated loyalty was going to be slaughtered in the mud. Lisa grabbed a heavy wool coat from the back of a chair, shoved her arms through the sleeves, and bolted out the door, chasing the Alpha King into the storm. The rain was a torrential, blinding sheet of ice water, turning the sprawling, forested grounds of the estate into a pitch-black labyrinth of mud and shadows. Lisa slipped on the slick grass, her lungs burning as she followed the distant beams of tactical flashlights cutting through the dense pine trees near the eastern wall. She could hear them before she saw them. The shouted commands, the frantic clicking of safety catches disengaging, and beneath it all, a sound that made her blood freeze. A deep, agonizing, rattling roar. It was the beast, and it sounded trapped. Lisa burst through the tree line into a small clearing bathed in the harsh, white glare of portable floodlights. The breath caught in her throat. The beast was backed against the sheer concrete face of the perimeter wall. It was a terrifying, magnificent sight, its matted black fur plastered to its massive musculature by the rain. But it was limping. A dark, thick streak of blood painted its left shoulder, the unmistakable result of a grazing bullet wound. Despite the injury, the creature stood tall, its lips peeled back to expose agonizingly sharp, bone-crushing teeth, a guttural snarl tearing from its chest. Forming a semicircle around the creature were 6 heavily armed guards, led by Silas. The lieutenant held a heavy, silver-plated combat shotgun, the barrel leveled squarely at the beast's chest. "Hold the line!" Silas screamed over the storm, his face twisted in a manic, triumphant grin. "He's cornered. Nobody shoots until I give the order. I want his head." "Silas." The voice boomed through the clearing like a crack of thunder, vibrating with such absolute, dominating authority that 2 of the rogue guards immediately dropped their weapons and fell to their knees. Cassian stepped into the light. He looked like the god of death himself. The rain slicked his dark hair to his forehead, and his eyes were no longer brown. They were a brilliant, burning, supernatural gold. He didn't have his weapon drawn. He didn't need it. The sheer, overwhelming pressure of his alpha aura slammed into the clearing, a physical force that made Lisa's knees buckle from the tree line. "Stand down," Cassian ordered, his voice low but carrying effortlessly over the driving rain. Silas turned, aiming his shotgun at Cassian. His hands were shaking, but his eyes were filled with venomous rebellion. "You've gone soft, Alpha. You brought a human pet into the house, and you let this abomination live while it endangers us all. The Northern Pack offered me a fortune to put an end to your little science experiment." Cassian continued to walk forward, completely ignoring the barrel of the shotgun pointed at his chest. "You have 10 seconds to drop the weapon, Silas. After that, I will not ask again." "I'm not dropping anything," Silas yelled, backing up a step. He suddenly pivoted, swinging the heavy weapon away from Cassian and aiming it directly at the wounded, cornered beast. "I'm fixing your mistakes." He racked the slide. The heavy, metallic clack echoed in the rain. "No!" Lisa didn't think. She didn't weigh the odds. She burst from the shadows of the tree line, a blur of motion in her oversized wool coat, and threw herself directly into the space between the barrel of the shotgun and the bleeding monster against the wall. "Lisa!" Cassian roared, the sound tearing from his throat, completely devoid of his human restraint. Silas panicked. His finger jerked on the trigger. The blast was deafening, but Lisa never felt the impact. A massive shadow eclipsed the floodlights. The beast had lunged, moving with a speed that defied its massive bulk, throwing its entire 300-pound body over Lisa, driving her into the mud to shield her from the blast. Simultaneously, Cassian crossed the 40-foot clearing in a fraction of a second. He didn't punch Silas, he collided with him. The lieutenant was lifted off his feet, his shotgun shattering into pieces as Cassian slammed him into the trunk of a massive oak tree. The sickening crack of bone was audible over the rain. Silas slumped to the ground, unconscious before he even registered the hit. The remaining guards scrambled backward in sheer terror, dropping their weapons and pressing their faces into the mud, submitting utterly to the monstrous, golden-eyed fury of their king. Lisa lay pinned beneath the heavy, suffocating weight of the beast. Her heart hammered against her ribs as the creature slowly shifted off her. She sat up, gasping for air, the mud soaking through her clothes. She looked down at the beast. It was breathing heavily, a new, bloody graze along its ribs where it had taken the brunt of the scattered shotgun blast. It let out a soft, whimpering whine and pressed its massive, terrifying head firmly against Lisa's chest, seeking comfort. Lisa wrapped her arms around its thick, wet neck, burying her face in its matted fur. "I've got you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I've got you, buddy." The storm broke just as the first pale slivers of dawn painted the horizon in bruised shades of purple and gray. The rain had reduced to a quiet, rhythmic drizzle, washing the mud and blood from the courtyard stones. Sector 4 was secured. The rogue guards had been stripped of their ranks and hauled away to the subterranean holding cells, awaiting the Alpha's terrifying brand of justice. Lisa sat on the edge of the stone fountain in the center of the courtyard, a heavy wool blanket draped over her trembling shoulders. The beast was laying entirely across her feet, a massive, unmovable weight. Marcus had brought an emergency medical kit, and Lisa had meticulously cleaned and bandaged the creature's wounds. Now it was sleeping, its chest rising and falling in deep, even rhythms, completely exhausted by the night's chaos. Footsteps echoed softly against the wet stone. Cassian approached. He had changed out of his muddy tactical gear, wearing a clean dark sweater and slacks, but the wild, dangerous edge of the night still clung to him. His hair was damp, and the faint, silvery scar on his neck seemed more pronounced in the morning light. He stopped a few feet away, looking down at the beast, then up at Lisa. The golden hue had faded from his eyes, leaving them a deep, exhausted brown. "You disobeyed a direct order," Cassian said quietly, his voice raspy. "I saved his life," Lisa countered, her voice equally quiet but firm. She looked up at him, her hazel eyes searching his face. She remembered the blur of motion, the terrifying, inhuman roar, the way his eyes had burned like small suns. "And you saved mine." Cassian sighed, a heavy, burdened sound. He slowly sank to sit on the edge of the fountain beside her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the gentle splash of water and the deep, rumbling snores of the monster at their feet. "You saw what I am," Cassian finally said, staring straight ahead. It wasn't a question. It was a surrender. "You saw the speed, the eyes, the strength." "I saw a man protecting his own," Lisa replied gently. Cassian turned his head, his dark eyes locking onto hers with a searing intensity. "I am not just a man, Lisa, and this creature," he gestured to the sleeping beast. "He is not an exotic dog. He is a lichen, a recessive feral mutation of our bloodline. He was born to a rival pack, driven mad by isolation and abuse. When I took the throne, I took him in. He is the physical manifestation of everything my kind fears we could become if we lose control." Lisa looked down at the massive black head resting on her boots. She slowly reached down, running her bandaged fingers through the soft fur behind its ears. "He's not a monster, Cassian. He's just broken, like the rest of us." Cassian felt a sharp, profound ache in his chest. He looked at her, this fragile, fiercely brave human woman who had walked into a vault of shadows, negotiated with a king, and taken a bullet for a beast. She hadn't run from the darkness. She had sat down beside it and offered it a blanket. "Mate," his wolf whispered, the instinct ringing through his soul with absolute, undeniable clarity. I hope you enjoyed this dramatic cinematic conclusion to the story. If you love the intense dynamic between Lisa, Cassian, and the beast, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more gripping, high-stakes romance and modern fantasy tales. Let me know in the comments which scene kept you on the edge of your seat.